Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. Today we are from Group 6 and we're going to present about the whisper of neuron transmission across the synapse. Okay, so this is the list of our group members, which consists of me, Azi, Ainur, Dini and Warda. Next, we're going to look at the list of contents that we're going to talk about in this video today. Okay, so I'll start off with what is nervous system. So, nervous system is the major controlling, regulating and communicating system in our body. It is the center of all mental activity, including thoughts, learning, and also memories. Together with the endocrine system, the nervous system is responsible for regulating and maintaining our body's homeostasis. There are two parts of nervous system. The first one is CNS, central nervous system, and the second one is PNS, peripheral nervous system. So next, I'm going to talk about neuron. So neuron, also known as nerve cells, are the functional units of the nervous system. They receive sensory information, convey the information to the integration center, such as the brain, and then conduct signals from the integration center to effector, such as glands or muscles. Next, we'll look at the structure of neuron. It consists of dendrite, nucleus, cell body, axon, myelin sheath, Schwann cell, node of Ranvier, and also axon terminal. Next, there are three types of neuron. The first one is sensory neuron, the second one is interneuron, and the third one is motor neuron. So that is all from me. I'll pass this to the next presenter.
Okay, next I will proceed to the types of synaptic transmission. Basically, there are two types of synaptic transmission, which are electrical synapse and chemical synapse. As for my part, I will explain about the electrical synapse. But before I begin, let me explain first on how the neurons communicate with each other, relaying messages throughout our body and powering all of our thoughts and actions. Neurons talk to each other using both electrical signals and chemical signals. Message starts as electrical signals and traveling rapidly down the neuron. The signals are called action potentials. When they reach the gap between two neurons, the message needs some help to get across. The information is transformed when action potential into a chemical message which across the gap called synapse, which are electrical synapse and chemical synapse. So why does the body have two types of synapse? Basically, at electrical synapse, unlike chemical synapse, there is a direct physical connection between the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron. This connection takes them the form of a channel called a gap junction, which allows current ion to flow directly from one cell into another. Electrical synapse transmit signals more rapidly than the chemical synapse do. Some synapses are both electrical and chemical. At this synapse, the electrical response occurs earlier than the chemical response. So what are the advantages of electrical synapse? For one thing, they are fast, which could be important say in a circuit that helps an organism escape from a predator. Also, electrical synapses allow for the synchronized activity of group of cells. They can carry current in both directions so that the depolarization of a postsynaptic neuron will lead to the depolarization of a presynaptic neuron. This kinds of bends the definition of the presynaptic and postsynaptic as well.
So I will explain about the chemical synapse transmission. These two neurons communicate even though they never actually touch. Instead, there's a tiny gap called a synaptic cleft between them. When an action potential races along the axon of neuron, activating sodium and potassium channels in a wave, it eventually comes down to the presynaptic terminal and activates the voltage, getting calcium ion channels there to open and release the calcium into the neural cytoplasm. This flow of positively charged calcium ion causes all those tiny synaptic vesicles to fuse with the cell membrane and purge their chemical messenger, which is the neurotransmitter. It acts like the couriers diffusing across the synaptic gap and binding to the receptor sites on the postsynaptic neuron. Depending on the type of neurotransmitter or the receptor, the response of the postsynaptic neuron can be through excitation or inhibition. Excitatory neurotransmitters that use gated ion channels are fast-acting. Other neurotransmitters affect the metabolism of the postsynaptic cell and therefore are slow-acting. So, the first neuron has converted the electrical signal to the chemical one, but in order for it to become an action potential again in the receiving neuron, it has to be converted back into electrical. And that happens once a neurotransmitter binds to the receptor because that causes the ion channel to open. When the ion channel opens, sodium ion diffuses into the postsynaptic neuron and action potential begins.
Next, I will present about the side effect of drugs and imbalance on neurotransmitter. So, what is drug? Drugs are substances that change a person's mental or physical state. They can affect the way your brain works, how you feel, and you behave. This makes them unpredictable and dangerous, especially for the young people. Can we say that drugs are typically distinguished from food and substances that provide nutritional support to our body? So, how drugs work on synapse? In the normal communication process, dopamine is released by a neuron into the synapse, the small gap between two neurons, where it binds to a specialized protein called dopamine receptors on the neuron. By this process, dopamine acts as a chemical messenger carrying a signal from neuron to neuron. Another specialized protein called transporter removes dopamine from the synapse to be recycled for further use. Drugs of abuse can interfere with this normal communication process. For example, cocaine acts as a binding to the dopamine transporter, blocking the removal of dopamine from the synapse. Dopamine then accumulates in the synapse to produce an amplified signal to receiving neurons. So, what effects of drugs? While altering neuron transmission, drugs can produce effects that make people want to use them repeatedly and induce health problems that can be long-lasting and profound. Some important effects are shared by all drugs can cause dependence and addiction. Most prominently, disruption of dopamine neurotransmitter system that result in initial pleasurable feelings like changes in mood, awareness, perception, and behavior. And with repeated use, potential functional and structural changes to neurons. So what happens if there is imbalance in neurotransmitter? Diseases hypothesize that insufficient level of neurotransmitter can lead to symptoms such as feeling of sadness, happiness, worthlessness, and insomnia or sleeping too much. It also can lead to mental health such as anxiety, ADHD, and depression. So let's hear a further explanation from an interview who is an ADHD sufferer.
ADHD briefly is a brain disorder ataupun neurodevelopmental disorder, essentially where your brain no longer functions like a typical brain. Yeah, so it's just a mental disorder where your brain is functioning differently than a typical human being. Yeah. So sebelum jumpa psychiatrist tu, masa nak pergi jumpa psychiatrist tu sebab masa tu ada a few problems macam mentally lah, time tu susah nak tidur, rasa murung, sedih, tak nangis, tak tahu sebab apa, and kena panic attack. So essentially time tu rasa macam okay, I think I really need help. So masa tu lah jumpa psychiatrist and tak ada suspicion I had ADHD ke apa ke, I literally did not know what was wrong. So bila jumpa psychiatrist tu, after a few times jumpa, then the diagnosis came as ADHD lah. So a few symptoms yang I experienced for ADHD is things like it's hard for me to have focus, macam attention span I very short. Lepas tu I have problem with essentially thinking about one thing at a time. I'm always anxious, my brain is always thinking about 1001 million different things. And then another thing is I have this thing called emotional dysphoria where macam small comments, contohnya orang cakap, oh SCL ni tak bagus tau, instead of taking it as something macam I need to improve, it becomes a personal attack, so I get very sad about it. Yeah, so like those are the things that I experienced. Okay, so I was diagnosed with a few things, which just to clarify with anxiety, depression, and also ADHD. So anxiety and depression came along with this long years of not being treated for ADHD. So I had to repress those symptoms, which essentially led me to developing a mood disorder. Whereas for ADHD, nobody really knows how you get ADHD, but it is usually genetic, and there is a suspicion that both my parents have undiagnosed ADHD, hence why I got ADHD. And so some of the things that people do not know about ADHD is what are the biological things that happens, right? So people with ADHD usually have less neuroreceptors, which helps you to have attention focus, number one. Number two, it is also very hard for people with ADHD to produce their own dopamines, and people who have ADHD tend to develop this need to always please other people, because from pleasing other people, essentially you get this secretion of dopamine. Yeah, I still do get treatment from the doctor, so obviously like because I went to see a psychiatrist, the things that I had were medications, and I have psychodynamic psychotherapy and also regular therapy sessions. So I still do go for psychodynamic psychotherapy on a monthly basis. I used to go twice a month or weekly, but now I go like every 6 weeks. And also I take medications which both.
From the interview, we can conclude that ADHD is one of the effects of imbalance on neurotransmitter, and it can be treated by special treatment from doctor or specialist. So that's all from us.
Thank you for listening to our presentation.